Human lifts alien girl from a flooded tunnel, but human sees her shadow moving without her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The tunnel groaned like a living thing beneath the storm, every steel beam shivering under the weight of thousands of gallons of runoff slamming through the drainage channels. Emergency strobes flashed in jittery red pulses, painting the slick walls like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Ethan Cole sprinted along the narrow service platform, boots splashing through rising water as his wrist display blinked a warning. Water level climbing past 3 feet and rising fast. The air smelled of wet concrete, burnt wiring, and the metallic bite of ozone from a fried relay box somewhere behind him. He should have turned back when the control room ordered evacuation, but the faint cry he'd heard, just a thin, quivering sound swallowed by the storm, wouldn't leave his mind. Ethan slowed, listening. The thundering water echoed down the corridor, but beneath it came something softer. A small gasp. A choked breath. Someone was still down here. Hang on, he muttered, more to himself than to the voice ahead. His flashlight streaked over the churning water as he moved toward a side passage where the grate had partially collapsed. The tunnel dipped lower there. Bad design, he always thought. But tonight it was turning into a trap. He waded in anyway, the cold hitting him like a punch to the lungs. A pale shape bobbed against the wall. A hand, small and blue-tinged, fingers barely clinging to a broken pipe. Ethan plunged forward, grabbed the wrist, and lifted. The girl was lighter than he expected, her skin cool under his palms, almost shimmering under the flashing lights. Her hair, blue-white, like river frost, clung to her cheeks. She coughed weakly as Ethan hoisted her onto his shoulder and pushed back toward the main platform. "You're okay," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him over the roar. "I've got you." The water surged behind them, slamming against the walls like an angry tide. Ethan climbed the metal rungs to the platform, boots slipping, muscles burning as he kept the girl steady. When he finally reached the walkway, he shifted her weight carefully, making sure she was breathing. Then something flickered at the edge of his vision. He froze. On the wall beside the flooded passage, cast by the same red emergency lights that threw their shadows long and thin, he saw his own silhouette, heavy, hunched from lifting her. Saw the girl's silhouette, small, limp against his shoulder. And then saw a third silhouette. A darker one. A thinner one. Standing upright. Staring back at him. It moved. Not with him. Not with her. But on its own. Gliding along the wall like a smear of ink drifting through water. Ethan blinked hard. Heart hammering. But the shadow didn't fade. It tilted its head. Slow. Deliberate. The girl on his shoulder stirred. Whispering something he couldn't make out. But her shadow, her real shadow, stayed perfectly still, clinging to her feet like any shadow should. The other one, the moving one, stepped backward and melted into the deeper dark of the tunnel, slipping away just as the next surge of stormwater slammed into the corridor. Ethan held his breath, unsure if the cold against his spine came from the soaked air or from the way that impossible silhouette had turned its head as if it recognized him. Ian Cole kept one hand braced against the slick railing as the storm sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the steady drip of runoff echoing through the service tunnel. The girl in his arms felt lighter now that they were out of the surge zone, but her breathing stayed shallow, her chest rising in quick, uncertain rhythms. He could feel the tremor in her muscles every time the lights flickered. The emergency system cycled again, switching the overhead lamps to a softer amber glow that made the concrete walls look warmer than they were. Ian walked carefully toward the nearest service alcove, a narrow metal booth used for equipment checks. The space was barely large enough for 2 people, but it was dry, and it had a working heater panel humming faintly behind a grated vent. He set the girl down on the bench, adjusting the insulation blanket from the emergency kit so it wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open, luminous and pale like morning frost. She looked at him for a second, confused, as if the world had not finished loading around her. Then she whispered, "You pulled me out." Her voice was soft, pitched like someone and used to speaking above a hush. Ian nodded, trying to keep his tone steady even as the image of the strange shadow kept replaying in his head. You were stuck. I could not leave you there. She blinked slowly, eyes drifting toward the tunnel behind him. Something followed me. Ian swallowed, glancing back. The passage stretched out in a straight line, quiet except for the distant rumble of water cycling through drainage pumps. Nothing moved. No extra shadow. No strange flicker on the walls. Yet the memory of that impossible silhouette lingered, heavy as a weight he could not shrug off. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated long enough that he wondered if she understood him. Finally she answered, "Leary." He recognized the accent, light and melodic, common among refugees from the outer districts. Many worked in low-tier maintenance roles. Few ever came near this part of the storm tunnels. "Leary, do you remember how you got down here?" She looked at her hands, studying the faint shimmer of her skin as if searching for a memory hidden in the light. "I was running. There was a warning. People were shouting. Then the lights went out." She paused, and a small crease formed between her brows. "I thought something touched me." Ian glanced at the heater panel. Its warm air drifted across the booth, washing away the chill from his soaked clothes. He rubbed his palms together, trying to ground himself. "You are safe now," he said quietly. "Once the flood resets, I will take you above ground. Medical staff will meet us there." Leary nodded, but her gaze drifted past him again, toward the walls, toward the dim, amber glow that made every shadow stretch long and thin. "When you pulled me out," she said softly, "did you see anything strange?" Ian hesitated, unsure if telling her would help or frighten her more. But she was looking at him with a seriousness that did not match her fragile frame. "I saw your shadow," he said carefully. "And then another one. It moved differently." Leary's breath caught, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of recognition that made Ian feel the air tighten in the booth. "It followed me," she whispered. "I thought it stayed behind." Ian straightened slowly, instincts prickling. He stepped to the booth's opening, scanning the tunnel again. Nothing. Not even a flicker. The pumps thudded, sending a vibration through the floor. Leary drew the blanket tighter, her voice barely audible. "Sometimes it gets ahead of me," she said. "Sometimes it does not come back right away." Ian turned toward her fully now, the weight of her words settling like cold water against his spine. "Leary," he said, steady but gentle, "what exactly is that shadow?" She looked up, eyes reflecting the amber light, and for a moment she seemed older than she appeared. "I do not know," she whispered, "but it has been trying to catch up to me for days." The heater panel hummed softly, casting a faint warmth through the cramped service booth, but the air still felt cold around Ian as he studied Leary's face. Her skin carried a faint sheen under the amber lights, almost like the glow of shallow water catching the last light before dusk. She sat very still, blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, eyes fixed on some point far down the tunnel that only she could see. Ian lowered himself onto the opposite end of the bench, giving her space. His uniform was still damp, the fabric holding the chill from the floodwater, but he barely noticed. The strange heaviness lingering in the air made every breath feel deliberate. "Leary," he said gently, "when you said it has been trying to catch up to you, what does that mean?" She shifted, pulling the blanket closer. "I do not know exactly," she whispered. "At first, I thought it was a trick of the lights. When I walked, it walked. When I stopped, it stopped. But sometimes it moved before I did." Ian considered the words carefully. He had worked in the storm infrastructure for years. Strange shadows were not new. The tunnels played tricks on depth perception. Reflections from pooled water distorted silhouettes. Faulty emergency lights stretched everything at odd angles. But the way she said it, quiet, steady, without dramatizing, made him trust her more than the systems he spent years maintaining. "Did anyone else notice?" he asked. Leary shook her head slowly. "In the dormitory, the lights are always dim. Shadows blend. No one pays attention to anything that is not directly in front of them." She paused, voice tightening. "And I did not want anyone to think I was unstable." Ian felt that word heavy on her tongue. In the refugee sectors, being labeled unstable meant being watched, reported, sometimes relocated. Shadows were the least of their worries. "You are not unstable," he said softly. "Something happened to you down here, and whatever that was, we will figure it out." Leary's eyes lifted to him, a quiet mix of trust and fear. When you saw it behind us, she said, her voice thinning, was it shaped like me? Ian hesitated. He did not want to frighten her, but she deserved the truth. Yes, he said finally. Only thinner. More stretched. Like the light did not know what to do with it. The air seemed to cool again, despite the heater's steady hum. Leary exhaled slowly. It used to stay attached, she whispered. Just like any shadow. But after the accident 2 weeks ago, it began to wander. Ian's brow tightened. Accident. I slipped during a maintenance shift, she said. The floor grid malfunctioned, and I fell through a panel. There was a surge. Bright light. Buzzing in my head. When I woke up, I thought I was fine. But my shadow was wrong. Her fingers traced small circles on the blanket, grounding herself. It is like part of me is always trying to walk away. Ian leaned forward slightly, his voice low. Did the surge hit your identification band? She nodded. It burned out the tracking chip. That is why they moved me to low-priority work. Damaged equipment means damaged worker. The idea bothered him more than it should have. She was young, quieter than most he had met in the tunnels, and clearly trying hard to appear composed. It made something inside him settle into a protective instinct he had not felt in a long time. A faint tremor shivered along the wall, a reminder that water still shifted in deeper passages. The lights flickered once, elongating their shadows on the steel floor. Ian watched carefully. His own shadow stayed where it belonged. Leary's shadow formed normally under her feet. But for a split second, just enough for his pulse to spike, he saw a thin outline appear behind hers, like a double exposure on old film. Then it faded. Leary did not seem to notice, still looking at her hands. Ian exhaled quietly, making sure his voice stayed steady. We need to get you topside, he said. Once the flood cycle finishes, I can call for an escort. Leary nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the tunnel again, soft and wary. I hope it stayed behind, she whispered. Ian wished he could say yes. But in the dim amber light, he was not sure it had. The pumps kicked into a higher cycle, a low mechanical rumble trembling through the floor plates as the system worked to redirect the last of the surge. Ian's wrist display flickered back to life with a soft chime, its screen illuminated by blue text that read, Flood recession at 12%. Estimated walkway clearance in 4 minutes. He exhaled, relieved, then glanced at Leary to see if she had heard the notification. She was watching the tunnel again, her posture pulled inward as if listening for footsteps only she could hear. Ian tapped the side of his wrist unit, pulling up the body camera playback. The device projected a small holographic square above his forearm, its light casting a faint glow across the booth. I want to check something, he murmured. Leary looked over, hesitant but curious. The video showed the two of them in jerky frames as he carried her up the ladder, water cascading behind them. The emergency strobes made every shadow smear and stretch. But then, a few seconds in, the static cleared, and the camera caught it. A slim silhouette detached from the wall, a darker patch against the red light. It stood still as Ian climbed. When he paused to adjust her weight, the shadow tilted its head toward him. Leary inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. It was real, she whispered. Ian paused the playback. Yes. He kept his voice calm, steady. But whatever it is, it did not follow us all the way into this booth. Leary shook her head slowly, her expression conflicted. It does not need to. It finds me through light. When the lights shift, it moves differently. Sometimes it waits until I am alone. How long has this been happening? Ian asked. Since the accident, she said. Sometimes it is faint. Sometimes it is clear. But it is always there, just far enough away that I pretend it is not. The lights flickered again, not as sharply as before, but enough to make Ian stiffen and glance at the far wall. Their shadows stretched gently, normal and aligned. Nothing extra, just the two of them. The pump's rumble softened as flood levels dropped further. Ian powered down the camera feed and stood, testing the booth door. The tunnel beyond was quieter now, the air holding only the faint echo of water draining through the deeper channels. We should move while it is calm, he said. There is a dry walkway to the east junction. From there, I can get us to the exit hatch. Leary rose slowly, gripping the blanket around her. The heater had helped, but her legs were still unsteady from the cold and the shock. Ian offered his arm without making a show of it, and after a moment she accepted, her hand light against his sleeve. They stepped out of the booth together. The amber lights stretched long across the corridor, picking up small specks of moisture still dripping from overhead pipes. The air smelled cleaner now, less metallic, more like rain evaporating off warm pavement after a summer storm. Ian kept his pace measured so Leary could match him. "Why were you assigned down here alone?" he asked after a moment. "Maintenance shifts usually have 2 workers. They reassigned me," she said quietly. "After the chip burned out, they said I needed time to adjust. But I think they did not want to spend parts on someone from my sector." Ian felt a dull ache in his chest at the words. He had seen the neglect in the refugee districts, but hearing it from her made it personal. "You deserve better than that," he said. Leary gave a faint smile, small but genuine. "You are the first person to say that." They reached the junction platform, where a narrow metal bridge crossed above a lower drainage culvert. The lights here were brighter, clearer, revealing the walkway ahead. Ian stopped to scan the shadows cast along the wall, every instinct alert. No flicker, no shape peeling itself away from their steps. Leary followed his gaze. "It feels quieter," she said softly. "Like it is farther away." Ian nodded, though the unease still lingered like a whisper at the back of his mind. "As soon as we reach the exit hatch, you will be safe," he said. Leary looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I hope you are right." Ian turned toward the walkway, tightening his grip on the rail. But behind them, somewhere deep in the throat of the tunnel, the lights dimmed for half a second. It was barely noticeable, barely a blink. Yet Ian felt the shift in the air, the subtle change in temperature, the way a shadow might slide just out of sight. Something had moved. The moment the lights blinked, Ian felt Leary tense beside him, her hand tightening around the blanket just enough for him to notice. The corridor ahead remained still, washed in warm amber tones, calm enough to make him almost doubt what he sensed. Almost. The pumps had quieted to a soft drone now, a steady background rhythm that made the tunnel feel less like a threat and more like a long, hollow hallway breathing on its own. Ian kept his steps slow as they crossed the narrow metal bridge, mindful of how the grate flexed slightly under their combined weight. Leary walked close to him, careful, her steps light as if she feared making too much noise. Her eyes kept drifting toward the walls, not with panic, but with a watchfulness that felt older than her years. The amber lights changed tone as they entered the next section, shifting to a soft white glow that made the air seem clearer. The walls here were smoother, newer, with fewer patches of rust and less evidence of years of repairs layered over each other. The change in lighting gave their shadows sharper edges, clean lines stretching forward across the floor. Ian glanced down at them without making it obvious. His own shadow matched his posture perfectly. Leary's shadow stayed neatly at her feet, the shape of her head and shoulders distinct and steady. For a moment, he let himself breathe. "We are almost there," he said gently. "The exit hatch is just past the next incline." Leary nodded, but she did not take her eyes off the shadows on the floor. "It always feels quieter before it comes back," she whispered. "Like the tunnel is holding its breath." Ian slowed. "How do you know?" "Because I feel lighter," she said. "Like something is not reaching for me. When it is near, the air changes. I cannot explain it, but it feels like stepping into cold water." Ian understood that more than he wanted to admit. He had felt that same cold, that same shift, when the lights blinked behind them. He guided her toward the incline, a gentle slope where the walkway rose several feet above the main drainage channel. Water below moved in a calmer, controlled flow now, the worst of the storm surge already redirected. Leary paused halfway up the incline, pulling the blanket closer around her. "Ian," she said softly, "what did you feel when it looked at you?" He stopped beside her. The question was simple, but the memory tightened his chest. "It felt aware," he admitted. "Not like a stray shadow. More like," he searched for the word, "like it recognized me." Leary's breath caught, the faintest sound, but full of meaning. "That is what it did to me after the accident," she whispered. "It did not just move differently. It looked at me. And once it did, I felt like something was missing." Ian turned fully toward her now. "Missing how?" She pressed a hand to her sternum, as if searching for a heartbeat beneath her palm. "Like a thought I meant to have, but never finished. Or a feeling I should have felt, but it slipped away. Every time it appears, it takes a little more space. A small piece. Something quiet." Ian felt the incline sway slightly under his boots, though the structure itself did not move. It was his own pulse, quickening. Why did you not tell anyone? Who would believe that a shadow can walk away from someone? She answered gently. That silence threaded between them, fragile and heavy. Ian looked ahead, where the incline leveled into the final corridor before the exit hatch. The overhead lights brightened again, almost reassuring, painting their shadows forward in long straight lines. He stepped forward, urging her to follow. But as their shadows stretched ahead of them, something shifted. Leary's shadow moved with her steps, smooth and natural. But several feet ahead, faint and stretched thin near the corner, another silhouette flickered as if it had been standing perfectly still, waiting, and only now noticed their approach. Ian stopped cold. Leary inhaled, soft but sharp, like a string pulled too tight. The thin silhouette tilted its head. Then it slipped behind the corner, soundless and weightless, as if inviting them to follow. Ian stayed perfectly still, the air on the incline suddenly too quiet, too thin. Leary did not look away from the corner where the thin silhouette had slipped out of sight. Her shoulders tightened beneath the blanket, not with panic, but with the slow, steady fear of someone who had lived with the impossible long enough to know when it was getting closer. The overhead lights hummed, a soft electrical tone that somehow made the silence deeper. Ian lifted his wrist slightly, checking the signal strength on his communicator. A faint red warning pulsed, signal interference detected. That was unusual. They were close enough to the exit hatch that the uplink should have been clean. Leary noticed the flicker on his wrist and whispered, "It does that when it is near." Ian lowered his arm slowly. "The interference?" She nodded. "Light, temperature, signal, all small things. It pulls at them like threads. I think it is still trying to return to me." Ian studied her face. There was no desperation in her voice, no dramatic edge, just quiet certainty, like she was describing whether she had learned to read. "If it is trying to return," he said carefully, "why does it stay separate?" Leary hesitated. "Because it is not only a shadow. It is something else. Something the accident changed." They moved forward together, following the curve of the corridor. Every few steps, Ian glanced at the walls, making sure no silhouette drifted out of place. Their genuine shadows stayed steady under the clean white light, stretched long but correct. When they reached the corner where the thin silhouette had disappeared, Ian slowed. He stepped ahead first, shielding Leary slightly behind him. The corridor beyond opened into a broader maintenance junction, a space where several drainage routes converged. The room had higher ceilings, pipes running along the roof like silver ribs. Pools of water reflected the overhead lamps in soft, shimmering patches. It was quiet. Too quiet for a room that usually carried the hum of active machinery. Leary stood close behind him, her breath soft, her presence light. "I do not like this room," she whispered. Ian scanned the corners. Shadows pooled naturally where the machinery blocked the light. Nothing moved. "We just need to cross to the other side," he said gently. "The exit hatch is maybe 40 yards beyond that panel door." Leary nodded, but her eyes lingered on the far wall. Ian followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then the lights flickered again, just a flutter, but enough to rearrange the shadows for a heartbeat. Leary's shadow shifted with her weight. Ian's shadow stretched across the wet floor. And near the far wall, far ahead of them, a slimmer silhouette appeared standing perfectly upright, even though there was no person casting it. It flickered as if deciding whether to stay or vanish. Leary exhaled, her voice barely a breath. "It is following the light." Ian's instincts sharpened. "Explain." "Shadows move when something blocks the light," she whispered. "But this one moves when the light changes. When the lamps shift tone or flicker, it uses that moment to step, like it is slipping between frames." Ian processed the idea quickly, his mind turning through years of technical training. Light cycles, frame rates. The storm drain lamps ran on a staggered backup system during emergencies. Every flicker created a microscopic gap in illumination, a gap where something could shift without being fully recorded. He nudged Leary gently. "Stay close." They moved forward, slow and steady. The thin silhouette remained still against the wall ahead, like a delicate cutout waiting for the right moment. As they neared the center of the junction, Ian felt a faint drop in temperature, enough to raise goosebumps along his arms. Leary stopped walking. "It wants something from me," she whispered. Ian turned to her. "What does it want?" She shook her head. "I think it wants to be whole again." but I do not know what that means for me. Before Ian could speak, the lamps overhead flickered again. A longer flicker this time, the kind that made the room dim for almost half a second. In that dimness, the thin silhouette peeled off the wall. Not fast, not sudden, just a smooth glide, like ink spreading across water. When the light stabilized, it stood several feet closer. Ian felt the air tighten. Leary's hand found his sleeve, not gripping, just anchoring herself. "Ian," she whispered, "I think it is trying to show us something." He swallowed once, steadying his breath. What would it want to show? Leary's eyes glowed faintly in the white light, reflecting a memory she had not yet spoken. "The place where the accident happened," she said softly. "I think it wants us to go back." The thin silhouette turned slowly, facing the tunnel that led deeper into the system. Then, it moved, just enough to make a new shadow stretch along the floor, pointing toward the darkness it had come from. The thin silhouette's stretched arm pointed toward the darker tunnel, its outline flickering gently as if caught between one frame of light and the next. Ian stood motionless for a beat, listening to the subtle hum of the backup generators and the soft drip of water from overhead pipes. Every instinct told him that moving deeper into the tunnels was a mistake, but Leary's breathing had changed. Not panicked, not frantic, just steady, as if something inside her had settled into place. "That direction," she whispered, "is where the surge happened." Ian nodded slowly. "The maintenance panel you fell through?" Leary wrapped the blanket closer. "Yes, but I do not remember everything. Only the light. And the sound. It felt like something split for a second." Ian absorbed her words. Split. Pieces. Shadows moving independently. His mind circled the idea like a technician circling a malfunctioning circuit board, looking for the point of failure. He exhaled through his nose, steady and slow. "If it wants us to go there, it must be connected to what happened." Leary took a small step toward the direction the silhouette had indicated. Ian instinctively reached out, not stopping her, but making sure she felt he was beside her. "If we go," he said softly, "we do it together. I will not let anything happen to you." Leary's eyes flicked toward him, and in the soft white light, gratitude showed in the faint shimmer of her gaze. They moved forward into the darker passage, the air cooling by a few degrees as they left the wider junction. This corridor felt different. Narrower. Older. The walls here bore repair plates from previous flood cycles, the metal slightly warped from years of pressure. Down here, the lamps were spaced farther apart, creating longer, deeper shadows between them. Ian watched each one carefully as they passed. "How far is the panel?" he asked. Leary kept her eyes forward. "Not far. I remember a sign with a number on it. A faded number. Several yards ahead, a metal post jutted from the wall with a small rectangular plaque attached. The number 6 was almost peeled away, leaving a rusted outline where the paint had once been." "This is it," Leary whispered. The floor dipped slightly near the plaque, forming a shallow depression where storm runoff collected. Thin ripples reflected the overhead lights in fragile patterns. Ian crouched, examining the grid panel beneath the water. A repair tag was still attached, its date months overdue for replacement. "This must have been where the surge hit," he said, tracing the warped edge of the grid. Leary knelt beside him, her reflection wavering gently on the surface of the water. "I stepped here," she murmured. "The panel gave way. I remember falling. And the light. A burst of it." Ian lifted the grid slightly, careful not to strain the damaged metal. The flashlight on his wrist cast a clean white beam beneath the panel. The space below was shallow, only a few feet deep, but the wiring junction beneath it was scorched, the insulation melted in uneven streaks. "The surge must have traveled through this," Ian said quietly. "If you fell onto it when it overloaded, the light from the blast could have created a perfect silhouette of you." Leary stared at the scorched metal, her expression softening with understanding and something heavier beneath it. "A perfect silhouette," she echoed. "A copy." Ian nodded slowly. "Maybe the blast separated it from you. Not physically, but through light. Through the reflection. Something about the surge made it linger instead of returning to your body." Leary exhaled, a quiet sound, like remembering something she had been trying to forget. "When I woke up, I felt thinner, as if something gentle had peeled away. Something quiet. And ever since, it has been following me." Ian stood, his boots leaving shallow prints in the thin layer of water. "If it is trying to come back, That means it is still connected to you. The lamps flickered again, just slightly. Enough for the thin silhouette to appear behind them, reflected in the water like a dark ribbon moving across the ripples. Leary's breath caught. Ian's pulse tightened. The silhouette leaned forward, not menacing, but as if urging them closer to the scorched wiring beneath the panel. "It wants us to do something," Leary whispered. Ian nodded. "Then we figure out what it is trying to tell us." The thin silhouette hovered at the edge of the rippling water, its shape stretching and contracting with each flicker of the overhead lamps, as if the light itself was breathing around it. Ian kept one hand lightly on Leary's arm, not restraining her, just making sure she felt anchored. The air in the narrow passage smelled faintly of overheated wiring, a warm metallic scent that clung to the back of the throat. Leary knelt again beside the scorched junction, her reflection trembling on the surface of the pooled water. "It wants us to look closer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ian adjusted the panel, lifting it just enough for the flashlight beam to illuminate the tangle of melted insulation. A faint shimmer caught his eye, a glint of something embedded in the damaged wiring. "What is that?" he murmured. Leary leaned closer, careful not to disturb the fragile pattern of light on the water. "I do not remember that being there." Ian reached down with 2 fingers and gently freed a small object from beneath the warped cables. It was a fragment of transparent material, no larger than a coin, with a faint iridescent sheen. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat trapped inside glass. Leary's breath caught when she saw it. "That was in my uniform," she whispered. "It was part of the identification band they issued me. The chip that burned." Ian turned the fragment over in his palm. Maybe the chip did more than burn. Maybe it recorded something at the moment of the surge. Leary looked at the thin silhouette reflected behind them, her expression tightening with realization. "It recorded me," she said softly. "Not just my position. Not just my shape. Something more." Ian nodded slowly. "Light can capture images, but energy surges can capture patterns. If the chip stored that pattern while it overloaded, maybe it created a kind of imprint." Leary swallowed. "A second me." Ian met her gaze. "A shadow version. Not flesh. Not fully separate. But real enough to move within light." The thin silhouette shimmered again, its outline clearer now, almost as if acknowledging what they had discovered. Leary's voice trembled, not with fear, but with something gentler, the fragile weight of understanding. "If it is a part of me, why does it stay apart? Why does it not return?" Ian looked again at the chip fragment, the soft pulsing in its center. "Maybe it cannot return until the pattern is complete. If this chip held the template for how your shadow formed, maybe it needs to reconnect with your body's energy. A kind of reset." Leary touched her chest lightly, the blanket shifting as she did. "I felt something missing after the accident. Something quiet. Maybe this is it." Ian set the fragment on the flat part of the panel. The thin silhouette stepped closer, not walking, but shifting with each flick of the overhead lights, drawn toward the chip like it recognized the faint glow. Leary reached out, her hand trembling slightly. "What happens if it comes back?" Ian held her gaze. "I think it gives back whatever was lost. Whatever the surge took." Leary looked at the silhouette again. The thin outline stood beside its reflection in the water, both shapes aligned, yet separate. "It does not feel dangerous," she whispered. "It feels lonely." Ian softened his voice. "Then let it not be alone anymore." Leary nodded once, steadying her breath. She placed her hand beside the glowing fragment. The lamps flickered, a long, gentle blink. In that moment of dimness, the thin silhouette moved like a strand of light breaking free. It slid across the water's surface, its reflection merging with her own. When the lamps brightened again, the silhouette stood directly behind her, its outline trembling, waiting. Leary closed her eyes. "If it is part of me," she whispered, "then I will not run from it." The silhouette leaned forward, its shape softening, dissolving into the glow from the fragment. Ian watched as the faint pulse of light grew brighter, as if drawing breath. Then, slowly, the glow traveled upward, casting a soft shimmer across Leary's face. Her shoulders relaxed. Her expression eased. And for the first time since he had pulled her from the flooded tunnel, her shadow formed perfectly beneath her, steady and whole. For a long moment, the tunnel held its breath. The lights steadied overhead, their soft white glow returning to its usual rhythm, no longer strained by the strange flickers that had followed them through the deeper sections. The thin silhouette was gone now, not dissolved into nothing, but gently folded back into the shape at Leary's feet, as if the world had finally remembered how her shadow was supposed to look. Leary stood very still, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders as she lifted a hand and studied the way the light touched her skin. Her shadow moved naturally with her, rising and falling as she shifted her weight. There was no lag, no distortion, no strange second shape trailing behind. Just one, whole and quiet. Ian watched her closely, noting the small changes. Her breathing had steadied. Her posture was less guarded. The faint tension that had lived in her expression since he first pulled her from the flooded tunnel seemed to loosen, leaving a softness he had not seen until now. "Are you all right?" he asked. Leary nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like a part of me came back. Something gentle. Something I did not know I missed." Ian exhaled, the weight in his chest easing. "Then we should get you outside. Fresh air will help." Leary looked once more at the scorched panel, the fragment that had pulsed so brightly now lying still and dim. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying, for not leaving me when things did not make sense." Ian offered a faint smile. Nobody should go through something like this alone. They turned toward the incline, retracing their steps through the narrow corridor. The lamps cast steady beams of soft white light across the floor, revealing no stray shapes, no distortions, no flickering slivers of darkness waiting to move out of place. Just the clean rhythm of the tunnel's recovery after the storm. As they reached the wider junction, the temperature rose slightly, and the faint hum of restored machinery returned. Leary walked with more assurance now, her steps firmer, as if the weight that had been pulling at her from the inside had finally let go. At the far end of the junction, the exit hatch came into view, its metal surface illuminated by a green operational indicator. Ian tapped the control panel, and the hatch released with a soft hydraulic hiss. Cool night air drifted in, carrying the scent of rain-washed pavement and city lights far above the underground system. Leary paused at the threshold, letting the air brush across her face. Ian stepped aside, giving her space. She looked down at her shadow cast on the metal floor, perfectly aligned and steady. "It is quiet," she said. "For the first time in weeks, it is quiet." Ian nodded. "You are safe now." She turned toward him, eyes reflecting the faint glow from the hatchway. "You stayed with me," she said again, softer this time, the words carrying a fragile truth. "No one else would have believed me." Ian met her gaze, steady and calm. "You did not need someone to believe the impossible. You needed someone to stand beside you while it felt impossible." Leary held his eyes for a moment longer. Then she stepped through the hatch, and the city's night light settled gently around her, shaping her shadow with perfect clarity, one shape, whole, moving in harmony with her again. Ian watched her walk forward, the quiet rhythm of her footsteps echoing softly. And in the silence that followed, something unspoken settled between them, warm and certain, as gentle as the night air rising from the world above.